Brilliant. Thank you, Michael, for that lovely warm welcome and summary of what we've done so far. We will share all the slides and the recording with everyone who has joined and registered, so don't worry about anything like that. As I say, we normally facilitate great speakers, but today I've been taking the hot spot because I feel I've got quite a lot to say about measuring the value from communities, and I wanted to share it with this community. So thank you all for joining. As I say, I married a Kinder whilst working at Cadbury, and I was there for 11 years, and I built up over 60 internal and external communities. And I just fell in love with communities because when they work, they really enabled the knowledge to flow internally and externally. So I learned, I failed lots of times, I reflected and I learned, and now I feel like I've got lots of experience to share with all of you. I've been AC 7 years after Cadbury. I've been working independently and I help all sorts of companies either set up communities or health check knowledge sharing activities and just help people all on the right path. If you've just joined, we'd love you to introduce yourself on the chat, and if you're not talking, maybe put yourself on mute because sometimes there's a bit of an echo and it just helps the clarity. So thank you for that. As I say, I've been a community builder from birth, and I found this picture at the weekend of me building a little group with my teddies and toys. But it really means, you know, I'm very passionate because I just see the value when it works, not just to the organisation, but to the members, to the stakeholders, to everyone involved. So I want to try and help you along that way. I'm going to go through a lot of slides, but as I say, you are going to get lots of them afterwards, and do use the chat to ask any questions if anything's not clear. So for me, just to make sure we have a shared understanding, I've made some assumptions on where you are and what you know about community. So I'm just going to confirm them now. But for me, a community is a specific group of people who have developed relationships around a strong common interest. So they're not just a mail group, they're not just a distribution list, they actually are engaging, interacting and working on something together. And that's the magic when that's the value, and that's what I want to help you prove. For me, a community connects the people that have that interest together, but the conversation helps you find out what they could collaborate on. And then if they can collaborate, it really divides the task and multiplies the success. So for me, this is where we want to get to, that it's not just an information sharing, that they actually collaborate and co-create something together. Then it helps the knowledge to flow, and it can solve all sorts of problems, as they solve, share and evolve knowledge together. Now that is really hard to measure, but what I want to do is show you some things that I've done that might inspire more connections, more conversations and collaboration to flow. So I made an assumption that you all agree with me on that, and that you have a really clear community strategy already, and that it's focusing on something really exclusive for a specific audience. With knowledge sharing, if we want people to volunteer their time, share knowledge, discuss topics, then we need to be really clear what's the benefit to them. What are they going to get out of it from giving up this knowledge? So the best way to do that is to find out what are their pain points, what is their biggest problems they're facing, so we can tackle that in our communities. As I say, if communities don't really work unless there's that clear mutual benefit. So as I said, I've made an assumption by going into this focus session on measuring communities that you've already got that solid base already. And obviously, if you need any help getting to that stage, we can talk offline about that.
Yeah.
Oh, hi. So what I want to focus on today is why measure? What can we measure? When should we start measuring? And who could we share our results with? We want to have the biggest impact and everything. I can hear a little bit of background noise. I don't know if that's just me, but if you're not talking, if you could put yourself on mute, I think it will just help the experience for everyone. If you want to ask a question, please do use the chat. Michael, my glamorous assistant, will be monitoring that and helping answer as many of your questions as possible. Okay. We always try and have lots of interaction. But with such a big group today, we're going to have to do it mostly on chat. So apologies if you guys were expecting to have breakouts and things. I mean, that's not going to be possible today. What I do want to start with is get to know you and your experience. What's your community? How long has it existed for? How long Has it been focusing on internal colleagues or a mixture of both? Now you should see a poll that's come up on the screen if you're watching through the app. I think that's right, Michael, isn't it? And you can get to choose from the questions that are on the screen now. And we can just get a flavour of who's on the call and what you're focusing on. So how long has your community existed? Do you focus online or offline? Is your community focused on internal colleagues? And how are you measuring the value? If you can vote now, that would be great. If you're on the web link, you can add your view on the chat. And you can also add, perhaps, what's your biggest challenge with measuring your community value at the moment? What are you struggling with? And we'll hopefully have time to come to that. Just give you one more minute to answer the poll. And I'm going to end the poll now. Oh, one more. And share the results. Hopefully you can all see that. So the majority, fantastic, 37% of over 3 years. So that's great. We've got a great experienced group, obviously a mixture as well, but the majority is over 3 years, which is fantastic. Is your community focused on internal? It's a blended, is the majority again, a mix of internal and external, 57%. Does your community mostly connect with its members online or face-to-face? And it's a mixture of both online and offline. I had to put normally there because I know we're all in a bit of a strange status at the moment, but I'm interested to hear that. And then, do you currently measure your community? Okay, so this is interesting. So 22% no, never had, it's too hard. 26 a little, 24% some platform activity, and a little follow-up and capture qualitative data as well, and only a very few measuring so much that they don't know what to do with it. So thank you for that. Hopefully you feel like you're in good company. And as I say, the question now for the chat to think about is, what's your biggest challenge with that measuring? And we'd love to know what you're doing. Okay, so why measure? Why should we measure? We really measure to help answer these questions. We want to know what we're doing is working. And if it's not working, we want to know what we can do about it before it's too late. So often we're in multiple roles, doing multiple activities at the same time. I want to make sure that the time that we are spending on our community management is actually working. We want to know that the time that we spend is supporting the community activities. We want to know who's supporting us, and if they're not, who are not, and where are we adding value. We need to answer these questions all of the time. So ultimately it's, where are we now? Where do we go next? And how do we get there? And we use the data and the measuring and the information to help impact our decisions. It's no good measuring, and I know the platforms are incredible now with what they can tell us, and perhaps it's overwhelming, and maybe we should only focus on a few things, and but make sure it leads to decisions. So if we're having a webinar, we want to know how many of our target audience are turning up, how many people are getting involved, how many people are confirming it's adding value, and that will decide what we should focus on going forward. If it's not helpful, if it's not adding value, then why do we keep going? And so often in communities, we might get into habits that we continue for a long period of time, and they might not be adding the value anymore, and we need to chop and change. So it's important that we understand what things are working in our community. And of course, we ultimately have a really limited amount of resources. So we don't want to focus on too many things and not make sure that they're adding value. So optimizing our time is really important. Collecting that data, analysing it, can help us really focus on the right things that are going to have the best impact. Also, it really helps, we don't just measure for our own purposes. Obviously, it helps us with our plans, content moderation. It also helps build and inspire our stakeholders. Maybe we want more resources or more support, so we need to prove the value of what we're delivering. Maybe we want to increase membership, so we need to show outside of our existing membership and show the progress that we're making. We need to communicate this regularly in a simple and meaningful way that helps both us and our stakeholders. And that's where sometimes, in my experience, people often do one thing that fits all, and that isn't the best way to do measurement. You need to scrutinize your data, but your stakeholders or your new members don't need to do that. So doing a one-pager for everybody isn't always the best approach. There is a mixture of opinions when it comes to measuring communities, because it is really hard to know the full impact of our activities. A lot of people think that because you can't measure the full impact, there's no point measuring anything, which I don't agree with. A lot of people measure the quantity, the number of members registered or the number of assets created, but it doesn't necessarily confirm the quality of those assets, and maybe that's a bit misguided. Whatever it is, there isn't one community metric that fits all. So we've got to work out what's right and relevant for our community and focus our efforts on measuring and understanding those. So as I say, it is hard, but it doesn't need to be impossible. And depending on, I've assumed you've got these clear goals, objectives. If you focus your measurement around those, then that's going to give you the best foundation. Okay, I'm going to ask you, Michael, in a sec what the biggest challenges are, but just to confirm why we measure, we measure to confirm where we are today. We use it to make decisions on where to focus tomorrow, and we confirm the value to all involved to really inspire and more support. So Michael, what does the group say about the biggest challenges so far?
No, there's some good responses actually so far. It's a mixture of stuff. Some is around the data. It's been either unrelatable or unreliable, sorry. Maybe some missing data, also possibly using systems like GA, which may not be the best ones to mix to put with it, because GA being more of a marketing tool. Some people asked about what's the baseline, how do you sort of measure as well, from if you're trying to compare community against other communities, and some of it's around the cultural stuff as well. So, and I mean, I put down, I know Nick sort of said about if it's about growth, but I said, look, some communities I come across, for some reason they only think about the number of members, not what they're actually trying to achieve. So for me, so sometimes the measurements can be completely wrong because it's an easy one to measure. So some great feedback so far. So we'll capture all those and put us back in as well. Yeah,
no, thank you. Thanks for summarising that. And yeah, do keep them coming in. So what can we measure, which kind of fits quite nicely to some of those challenges, especially with getting a reliable baseline? It really depends on what your core objective is and what you're trying to prove is happening. So we can do that in a number of ways. We can do that from the activity on a platform, like we were saying with the data, or we could have it from attending events, having feedback or surveys, asking the audience what's working, what's not working. The hardest thing is connecting it to outcomes and impact. So for example, you come to this webinar today and you implement a couple of the ideas. It's going to be really hard for me to follow up and find out what's happened. And that's the same in our community. So some sort of feedback loop, some sort of mechanism for people to say, yes, I did this on the back of the community and I've delivered X, Y, Z is really important, but it is hard to facilitate. But I'm going to give you some ideas on how best to do that. So I'm going to ask, what are you measuring and how do you connect to those outcomes? So looking at the quantitative data, as Michael just said, a lot of people focus on the number of members and are really pleased to report, their memberships are going up and up and up, and isn't this fantastic? But if the number of active members is flatlining, like we can see on this document, it doesn't mean we're building any more engagement, or perhaps, depending on our objective, but, helping more knowledge be shared between the group. Maybe they're just coming in for information and they're not engaging and building relationships, which is what we're ultimately trying to do. So we want to look a bit further, not just at growth of number of members, but growth in activity as well. Here's some examples of things you could measure. So the number of members who contributed in the past 30 days and compare that month on month. You could have a look if the number of contributors are still active after 6 months. Maybe they just come for the beginning and then disappear. We might want to look at the number of posts that were made and the average post per active member, so we can really see what is going on. The one I really like is time spent on the site. Now, for reading and absorbing knowledge, we know if it's really short time, then they're possibly, you know, not getting real value from it. So if we can see that time spent is going up and up and up, we could make a correlation that they're adding value, and then follow up with a survey, which I'll come on to in a sec. For engagement, number of percentage of the total members who are being active each month, to see if what our activities are helping enable that to happen. Maybe the number of comments or reviews on each piece of content. As I say, we want to involve and co-create new content, so we want to see that changing. So we want to see maybe forum post downloads. I love it when a community co-creates new knowledge and there's lots of co-authors, and we can really see that content is evolving. So lots to think about there. I'm going to keep going because there's lots to get through. But what ultimately, you pick the data that's going to best confirm your business objective with your community. And then you want to look and observe the trends. Are you increasing, decreasing? What contributed to the biggest peak or the biggest dip? Are there any barriers? Are there people coming but not staying? Are they not feeling welcome? And particularly as this audience, you know, you're 3 years plus, most of your communities, you know, maybe it feels a bit clicky for new members, and the existing members are being really active, but new members never feel like they get, and they feel welcomed. All that data you could have available to you and focus on, and then work on a new member onboarding process, or getting new members to post. You could focus, rather than doing you know, all of it, just focus on one or two things. Whatever you're doing, focus on the things that best demonstrate you're meeting your goals, or if not, then you've got a chance to do something about it. Here is, so still on the quantitative stuff, ideas generation. So this was a community that I worked with, and they're all about ideas and innovations. And what they wanted to do was not just, they took these ideas, they voted on them, and then they promoted them to go into a wiki to be stored for future reuse. So it was really important to see how many people were involved in these events, what, and you can see when there was different peaks was when there were events, how many comments and forum posts were made. But we could see, and then August, we had a natural dip with holiday time, when we could go on holiday. And it could really show that, and it influenced my plans then going forward. So as I say, there's a million things you could measure, but pick the things that support your community best. Okay, so I'm gonna not ask you just now, Michael, what they're measuring, but I'll be interested in a few minutes, because I think I better do qualitative first. A lot of people look at the data, but they're not necessarily talking to the audience. So my important message here is make sure you're understanding from them what is working, where the value is. If they're not coming back, why are they not coming back? You want to know what's working. So you want to find out if it's helping them. Are they spending now less time finding or creating existing knowledge? Are they making fewer mistakes? I love that, because they have the power from crowdsourcing or avoiding duplications. They feel better informed because they're getting better communication and knowledge through the community. And I love, you know, it's really hard to measure feeling valued and fueling productivity. But if the members say, I've done this a few times, do you want the community to continue? And they say, yes, you know, oh, we've got a change in leadership. No, but we still want to continue. For me, that's really important. It gives that sort of thumbs up that the community is adding value. But we've got to balance that with the data that we find. So we can do that in surveys, polls. You can use survey monkeys, all sorts of different ways to confirm the value. As I say, my biggest tool in my toolkit is, do you want it to continue? And they say yes, and you say why, and then they start giving you an abundance of examples of where the communities add value. Whereas if you ask them, how is the community adding value, they don't tend to answer it quite as honestly. And here's some examples I've got here. It helped me solve problems, accelerate projects, raised awareness and visibility. Challenges were faced or addressed and resolved by a task force. We had this internal power into collective experience. We built stronger relationships, and it widened my internal network. Ooh, I think someone's not on mute, but don't worry. If you can, that'll be great. But don't. We'd love to have a chat, but I'm not sure it's going to be possible with 70 odd people. So talking to the audience,
Can we go
we
back
need
to this little summary?
yeah, I think it's yeah, let's do that.
Okay. No, so a few people have sort of mentioned like you've gone to like the surveys, and a few people have looked at using surveys to filter back on it, and also some of your suggestions around sort of like the time on sites. And Nick's also mentioned about like the case deflections where people go into the community rather than going to sort of like help centres or telephone calls. So there are ways to do it. I suppose it depends on the type of community you've got and what the overall purpose and objectives are, that they can be quite different, or how you want to measure it. And I think for a lot of communities, probably sometimes it's a bit harder to actually work out what you're going to measure and how you're going to measure it from the sort of things I mentioned there.
Yeah.
And also, yeah, Eugene mentioned about the idea how you convert quantitative metrics into qualitative and working towards business outcomes as well. So there's a whole range of different sort of like things people are trying out.
And I would say, and I know we get a bit surveyed out, I can feel the yawn when you just mention a survey, but polls I find are really good, just like what we've just done earlier, you know, to quickly say yes, no, can we focus on, you know, just to get a steer is really good.
Yeah, so John mentioned about financial sort of RNIs, return on investment. I mean, I've done some stuff where I've looked at like the avoidable cost measures, where people have been sharing materials and reduction of having to rewrite that from scratch. That's quite an interesting one. That's all based on the idea from ConocoPhillips and their stuff around barrels of oil saved. So the stuff around that. And another one I've used quite a bit as well is stuff around like using the maturity matrix. So using the maturity matrix to understand where about people currently are and where they want to be in the future, and then using that to be a benchmark to refresh the group maybe sort of 6 months or a year later to see how they've improved, especially if it's around capacity building and development of a particular group and around a certain area.
Definitely, it's got to confirm that it's connected to impact and outcomes. And that you're getting that value. And I've got a couple of examples I think coming up which might help those that were asking about that. For knowledge activities, it may be time saved by reusing existing knowledge. So for onboarding at Cadbury, we created manuals and toolkits, and the community created different parts of that, and we were able to speed up onboarding. The provision or adoption of solutions from other areas. So I say asking for help, using different things, we were able to speed up projects, collaborations, avoiding duplication and speeding up implementations. And how we did that to connect to impact and income was the success story. So we had a join up newsletter where we celebrated about 6 to 8 stories every month of where people had helped each other. And that really helped with the collaborative culture. I've got a couple of other examples here. As I say, it's so hard with the internal ones to share with you, but this is an external one, a community for tax lawyers and accountants. Now they're all competing people, so they're all working against each other, but they realized that they couldn't have the knowledge for all the different countries all at the same time. So they agreed to create residency scheme booklet that they all contributed to. So we asked them what the problem was, they agreed what they would co-create, and from creating this asset together, they then increased ongoing engagement on the community by 1200%. So it was sort of coming together on something that they couldn't work on their own, that helped bridge that gap even though they were competitors, and they celebrated lots of great things. Another one, Scottish Tech Army, was created just for in response to the pandemic when IT specialists were furloughed or made redundant. They're now working on projects from the Scottish Government, and they've already achieved in 7 months 176 projects, so many volunteers and locations. So connecting to not just the data on the platform, which they have about 50 channels on Slack, they are actually delivering real projects and can demonstrate their impact on health and social care, education, and things like that. So as I say, we can't mobilize everybody, but I thought these examples, you can go and have a look and it might inspire you for some of your communities. So what we can do is measure the activity. We can measure how many people are attending or visiting our platforms and engaging. We can see how they're contributing. We can measure who's exchanging, and then we can follow up with them on what happened next. What was co-created? What was the quality like? Did the solutions or ideas as it worked? And then what was the impact? And then following up even later, what happened because what was shared in a community. And those hopefully will inspire your existing audience and your new audiences, and unlock hopefully even more value and resources to support you. So I hope, I'm not sure if there's any more, Michael, but is there any other examples on how they connect to impact? Or
No, a lot of people are actually asking around the ROI about different examples. I'll try and dig it out, but I know Etienne Wenger come out of a calculation that you could use to sort of give you a rough estimation on return on investment. So I know, John, you've done his course, so maybe you might remember where it is, but if not, I'll try and dig it out and pull it up somewhere.
As I say, there's so many things you can do, but I would connect it to what your business objective. So if it's, number of, upskilling your audience, or call reflections on a product call center, depending on what you're doing, then find the one that matches your business objective. Otherwise, you can get distracted by measuring everything and then not focusing on the right thing. So I hope that helps. So when should we measure? All the time. I think I called this, didn't I? Measuring isn't just for Christmas, it's for life. But I hear a lot from colleagues, that, I'll measure it once it's established. So I'll measure it, when we've had our first 3 months. And I'm like, no, you should measure from the beginning. And then when you do any particular activity, maybe you're doing a knowledge exchange or knowledge markets or anything like that, and then you want to measure before, during and after, and see what's happening. As I said, it doesn't have to be something really full. It could be a quick poll. Was it really hard to find who to talk to before the knowledge market? Do you have a better idea now you've got knowledge profiles? The community could help enable all sorts of things, but you can get that feedback from your group. Whatever you do it regularly, and confirm progress, because you want to be the first to know if something's not working. You don't have to share everything with every stakeholder, but you need to know exactly what's working. I've tried all sorts of things. Ask me anything, audience with, and one thing in one community will thrive, and in another community it falls over before it's even got started. So if I've done my research right, then I tend to now just focus on the activities that add the most value. So this was the example I was referring to earlier. Mondelez, their community had very specific needs for engineers to have a knowledge base, but they couldn't create it all individually. They co-created it and identified what structure and documents they wanted to have. What they did is they got a baseline before on how long it took people to get onboarded, and how much experience and time was needed from the experts to spend with newbies, and they were able to measure and confirm the value, and how they sped it up from, it reduced the time from 8 to 4 weeks, and the time to the experts was even lower. So it really helped prove the value, and that was a pilot, and then they reproduced that with lots of other areas as well. So really important, don't wait until you've launched and piloted and proved it. Really get that worst case scenario before you start, so you can demonstrate good progress. What you want to do, and I quite like this graphic, is know that whatever you've done, you've helped make more knowledge flow where it didn't before. A community, as I say, it connects people for those conversations, and we want to make sure that they're collaborating and working on something really cool together. So how often do we measure? We want to ourselves measure weekly. We want to understand what's worked this week, what hasn't, who's been returning, and so forth. But what we want to tell our members, maybe we only want to do that once a month, confirming, how many new members, how many new knowledge assets created, and things like that. And then stakeholders at a frequency that you need them to support maybe future decisions, and so forth. I'd definitely make a point in your diary annually to really confirm progress. So things move on so fast, and you forget all the things that you've done. Most of my communities do an infographic for the last 12 months, confirming the highlights and the progress, and also what they need help on going forward. Okay, so measuring, when should we measure? We should measure before, during and after, and make sure that we can demonstrate progress. Any other reflections, Michael, before I move on?
And there's some good sort of people sharing different ideas. Actually, one question from Jim mentioned around what measures are useful for persuading folks who don't understand the value in communities. So I think that's sort of, especially from when I first started off of this, we borrowed stories from elsewhere to show examples until we got our own stories. And once we got our own stories, we could easily tell stories about where someone was saved, sort of, I don't know, some or in the project and program management community where they developed a methodology that was shared between 300 local authorities rather than everyone paying individually for it. So it's those sort of stories, and you can start putting monetary costs on. That was examples I was able to get to at that point. But I don't know if you got anything around that. Let's see.
Yeah, no, sorry, I was just reading the chat as well. What I was going to say is if it connects to the objective, so and you can prove the value. So I'm just reading like the support tickets or the removing meetings, whatever I do, I'd connect it to their biggest bugbear. So I've said at the beginning of this session, what is the community's pain points? What are they struggling on? Is it that they're meeting overloads and they're not being able to get on with their work? Is it because of they can't find what they need to find, so they don't know who the experts are to talk to? Whatever the bugbears are, if the community can help solve them, then you can show that you're saving time, money, resources, and building that buy-in. I think if you don't know what their bugbear is and you're focusing on things that aren't right and relevant, you're never going to be able to convince them to measure the value. So the value needs to come and the activities need to come on what's most pressing. Now, the problem we have is sometimes what the organisation wants and what the members want isn't necessarily the same. And that's why we need to work on it. So I can give you an example with, different times of career. People are saying, oh, a lot of people are leaving the business. How do we capture what we know? Why would a community help us add value? Because it may be that they were really good at capturing their knowledge throughout their career, but they're not trusted in the new audiences, or you've acquired a new business. So you've got to foster relationships around that. And then the community really helps build those relationships, and then they trust those resources and more likely to reuse. So it's not just about capturing knowledge before someone leaves a business. It's about socializing and supporting that. Does that kind of answer the question, Michael? I thought I went off on a bit of a ramble then. But...
Yeah, also been some great sort of feedback here. Oliver's been sharing back some ideas, and same with Nick and a few others, and so some good stuff on here. I'll start counting all the number of comments on this. But great sharing so far.
Yeah, we can share the chat with everyone as well, and so you can follow up with each other. That's what we would love, to happen as well. So as I say, measure what's important to the community to demonstrate that you're having an impact, and to prove the value for new people to get involved is to see that's going to help them as well. So who do we share? We share it with all the stakeholders. So I'd like to know, who do you currently share your results to? Is it just your line manager, or do you do a company-wide communication? What do you currently do? For me, it's you do need to communicate to all stakeholders, but it's different for different groups. Not everyone needs the same level of detail but you do need to keep them informed so that community is top of mind. Do an easy, quick stakeholder mapping, find out what they're most interested in, what's their biggest bugbear. If the finance guy needs to know how much money is saved or how much it's costing, if HR want to know that people are feeling valued and they're staying, find out who from these people need to know what, and then produce something regularly for them. So often, as I said at the beginning, someone does something in one format and then it's just lost in a pile of other communications. And we want to really make sure what's in it for them and what do you want them to do based on that communication. So we really can equip them to best support you in the community going forward. So a good habit is to create a regular communication plan. I've got the example of Trello there, or it can be on anything. Your team, maybe your team meeting, just give them a quick update, or you reflect on insights. But community members, you might need something more substantial, that monthly, confirming how many tracks had been covered off or things like that. And then stakeholders, particularly talking about concerns that you have or what you might need help on. And I think I've got an example. Coming up on stakeholder comms. I think that comes up in the last bit. So I'll pause for a second there. So yeah, who do you currently share with, Michael? Has there been some examples?
Yeah, some great examples so far. So I've got a mixture of stuff up from line manager, leadership, CRO, CEOs. Some are organisation wide. Some are actually started off as that, but also have summaries that are more specific to certain audiences. So I think again, it depends on what you're measuring and what you're measuring for, and then you break it down that way. So some are going blanket, some are going more specific. And
yeah, and what you want them to do.
Yeah, and that's interesting. That's always one of the questions I always think about is that if I'm going to provide this information to somebody, what are they going to do with it? Is it going to be one load on, well, that's a nice graph, thank you for that? Or is it going to help make some decision? Is it going to make a decision? If it can help make a decision, that's more useful. If it's just going to be oh, thank you for producing this really nice graph for me, I'll put that in my cupboard. Is it really worth providing that information to them? And I've seen that. I've had that happen to me a few times in the past.
Definitely. And that's why I say one size does not fit all. You want to say, this is what's happening, this is what we need help on, this is where you could support us. And then it's really becomes a much more meaningful communication than just noise. So as I think I've got some examples here, some good ways I've found to share these results. So it should be tailored simply, clearly, and regularly. So they trust you, they trust your measurements, and they trust the progress that you're communicating, or not, if it, whatever you need help with. So your team, it could be an infographic, like I was saying. There's an example here, sort of showing the progress. Maybe I've added another one in here, your community champions. So your super members, maybe they need to have a greater level of detail than the wide community, particularly showcasing them or their support. And you could do that maybe every other week. Community sponsor, particularly on benefits, concerns, opportunities, and threats. Senior leadership team, recognising particularly people's contributions. We had town halls, I'm sure many of the organisations do, and the leadership team would ask me for a quick update, and they'd always mention the different community managers or outstanding contributions. It just became a standard regular thing that I passed on to them, and they spoke to the audience with. And then company-wide was this newsletter showcasing role model behaviour. And it became, at the beginning, sort of, you had to work quite hard to find the success stories. And by the end, you had to sort of filter, because there was so many. This one is actually, I borrow from Severn Trent, because I just think it's really simple. And if there's many people at the beginning of their journey, they might like this one. So they call this their ABCD dashboard. They try and keep everything onto one page, and they can put, what did we deliver, what activity went on, what were the benefits, so the things that are a bit harder to measure, what happened as an outcome from those activities, what concerns, issues, or questions they might have had come up that they need support on, and then what they're going to do next, what's going to be the key deliverables going forward. There's obviously lots of different ways to do that, but I just think it's a really nice way to demonstrate the value and the activity from the community. Community-wide, yeah, this is, Spotify's a brand community, but you can see they've got all really clearly front and center of how many ideas, how many are live, how many are implemented. So you feel that if you're contributing here, that it actually gets listened to and gets done. And then Join Up News, this was the newsletter I was suggesting, that actually you can celebrate those stories. It was like having a cup of coffee with your internal audience and sharing the examples. Everyone's name was sort of tagged and referenced, and it really helped inspire a collaborative culture. And then wherever you can, make it impactful and fun. This videos are amazing. I know we don't always have the luxury for videos, but little sound bites, little storyboards, anything like that to celebrate what you're doing really helps show the impact of your community. Wherever you can, make it personal, how things have helped you and how others have impacted you, and that really helps bringing the data to life. So there's lots of good ways to share it, but my my advice would be to keep it tailored, keep it simple, keep it clear, and do it regularly so that they trust that. Okay, so what have you heard? I've gone through that way too fast, but hopefully that's given you some ideas. I'd love to hear what you've heard today that you might try, even all the suggestions that have come from each other on the chat. I'd love to know what you're interested in and what you might try. And if you've got any further questions, then we will ask. Let me do that first. Is that someone raising a hand? Hang on a second.
Hi. Yes.
Alex, yeah. Hi, did you want to ask a question?
Yes, if that's okay. Thank you so much, Nancy. That's really insightful. And to answer your first question, probably the stakeholder mapping. I've not done that yet and definitely want to take that first to try. And in terms of my question, I've put it in the chat at the top, but is there any way of baselining what you constitute as effective engagement for a community considering that I am looking at that more so it's still quantitative, obviously, rather than qualitative, but I'm trying to measure, for example, how many people attend regularly some of our community meetups when comparing to the number of overall people who are, how to put it, potential members of that community. So we know they're all user researchers, but we have obviously a proportion of them attending regularly. How do we know if that proportion is effective when compared to other communities of practice across government, or like in your experience through Cadbury and other organizations?
So there's lots of different,
sorry, as I say, Community Roundtable and a few other organisations have done around stuff around the last sort of 10 years. They haven't done anything for the last 5 or 6 years around the percentage of participants in communities. So you got like originally like the 1-9-90 rule, but there's also other versions of it. So you've got things like I think it's 15, 25, 25, 65. So it's like how many people participate, how many people interact, how many people are lurkers. So you could base it around those sort of concepts to give you a rough idea about where you are. So, and again, it's the stronger the community facilitation, the more active the participation rates are. It's called participation inequalities. So you could use that as a benchmark if you just want to go broad across it, but it actually might have something more specific.
Yeah, so it really depends. So a lot of the value that comes from communities is having an audience that you can suddenly call upon when something goes wrong, right? That you need help with, that you weren't anticipating, but you've got a group, an online space to ask for help. Now, if that's your goal, which I can assume it might be common with a lot of you, you might want to measure the time it takes for that question to be answered. So it would prove that if someone needs help, that it's answered in hours and that the quality of the answer was applied, and you could follow up on that sort of thing. Engagement for engagement's sake might not be the right thing to measure, because it's, you know what it's like yourself. You go to these sorts of places when you need something. You're not necessarily checking in all the time. What we want to happen is that there's such solid relationships that people are in there all the time. But especially like you say, if you're building a community practice and you're just going, I would measure time someone takes to answer the question. And if, you know, at the beginning you might be tagging a lot of experts and you know, might be a bit manipulated, but over time that becomes organic and is happening really fast, then I would show that engagement, you know, is confirming the value to that community and people trust the process. So does that answer your question, Alex?
Thank you so much, Nancy and Michael. And Michael, if you don't mind sharing the link to, you've mentioned a few names and I didn't have a chance to jot them down.
No, what I do is I've got a slide all on that, so I can pull it up later on for everyone to explain what it is.
Fantastic, thank you.
So, and yeah, we were talking about ROI, weren't we, and like service support and things like that. So you can track the number of questions that were asked, but what you really want to track is the value that those questions have had the desired impact, which is where the follow-up comes. And that does take time, and it is, you know, manual and sort of following up with people. And often I've done it a lot in the beginning, and then I might have maybe not have done it as much and just sort of checked in with a few key people thereafter, particularly, you know, if you're building, as I was, lots of different communities at the same time. But getting into that habit, you know, having a feedback area on your community to say, where have you added value? What have you done since, you know, this community started, so that they can start volunteering those successes. Because ultimately, if you're all in it together and you've all got this shared interest, you do want to demonstrate I used what you gave me, or I used, I shared this, or, I've then now worked with this person. So again, it may be having a self-disclosure area where people can confirm that, and that will really help people move forward.
Also, some of the Q&A, like quick question and answer things you get in forums, especially around someone says, has anyone got a copy of this?
Yeah.
This presentation, or has anyone done something on this? And quite often going back to the people who responded back to those questions, say, okay, someone shared, say, a presentation with you. How did you reuse it? And what was how long did that save you, right? Instead of writing it from scratch. And so you can get like that sort of measurements. You start seeing those all the time after a while when someone asks those questions. Has anyone got a copy of this? Has anyone got this? I've seen examples where someone shared the whole of their FAQs for SharePoint. It saves sort of like 20, 30, 40 days worth of time for another organization.
Yeah. But that's why it's hard to say, oh, you should measure this, because that might not be relevant to, to another organization, but to some organizations. Co-creating those resources that accelerate knowledge, learning, all of that sort of thing are great. And if you can get the baseline before and know, we didn't know who to talk to. We didn't know where to go. We didn't know who to ask. And now we've got a group of people, we can get answers in minutes, and we trust the resources, and, it's all great collaboration between us is ultimately where we're aiming for. I've got a couple of more things I want to say, and then, if there's anyone want to ask anything else, please do continue. I'd love to hear more what you're going to try. But for me, measuring is to measure, to know what we're doing is working, and if it's not working, we need to do something about it. I know I've said that a few times, but it's really important that we don't measure for measure's sake. What we can measure? We can measure activity, engagement, outcomes, and impact. We should start measuring as soon as we can, and then during and after. And we should share our results with all stakeholders, but break it down into different messages depending on what we need their support on. And good ways: keep it tailored, simple, clearly, and regular. It can be a one-line email. Like I remember a community manager going, I can just send this to the CEO with one line about the community has saved X amount because of X. And I said, yeah, just that. That is just that. It doesn't have to be a president's report and everything. You've just got to let the right people know what's working. And if not, then next time you need some help, they're going to be more open to supporting you. Ultimately, whatever you do in your community, the ones that have the strongest or the highest value meet the audience's ever-changing needs. So this is where we have to be really proactive and responsive, and make sure that we're focusing on, in our content moderation, events and activities are what our community wants, and then we can make sure that we're delivering the most value. So that means measure, share progress, and then hopefully more seeds will grow. So one way I wanted to sort of demonstrate some of these things with you today was to run another poll and find out if you have learnt anything. So if this webinar was a community and we wanted to find out if we had delivered any value or impact today, we could ask a poll at the end and say, has this been helpful? Have you learnt anything? Obviously feel free to share anything else in the chat, and that way we'll be able to determine that this 1 hour has delivered some sort of value. If not, then we could ask for, maybe we could follow up with a survey or a conversation, and we could find out what we could do differently next time. Another way to do it would be, if we were trying to foster relationships with this audience, we could measure the engagement that's in the chat. So we could have a look at how many comments and responses, if all the questions got answered, and we could count them up and see how much those engagement has helped foster relationships. So Michael, I don't know how many posts we feel we've had in the last 60 minutes.
I just done a quick count, 256.
256, wow. So yeah, I mean, our goal wasn't to necessarily build strong relationships with each other, but you can so the people that were worried about how they were going to do surveys or things like that, then that could be a good demonstration. What I would do is do that every webinar, and to see whether I'm making more progress next time, or if different topics are taking different conversation, things like that. So on the result, sorry.
Also, there's also been a lot of stuff where I think there's more discussions that can take place. So maybe certain specific parts that we've talked about can go into another session. I mean, like Nick's asked a few bits about some of it. Eugene's asked about things around culture and culture change. John's talked about some of the stuff Etienne Wenger's done there. So people have even come up with suggestions of things they might be able to help out with as well. So,
and we would love that. We are totally in this to help you connect and find each other and continue the conversation. We don't pretend to know it all at all. As I say, people were asking me about measurement, and it felt a really good time after the year we've had to sort of pull out some of these things, because people were feeling maybe a bit lost or just wanted a bit of a steer. So that's why I've sort of focused on that. But all of those things you've mentioned, Michael, culture, platforms, they could be a whole webinar series on their own. As I said, I've tried to focus on sort of inspiring you to think about your measurement and making it as impactful as possible by giving you these sorts of tips. So it looks like majority, 84% have found it of value and learned something. So that's good. I do continue on the chat and ask us anything. I'm going to do a little bit of promotion now. We are in the middle of doing an introduction to community management course. I'm going to be running it again in May. So if you want to do a whole full suite of these sorts of things, you can join that. And we'll do one on introduction to community knowledge management as well. Our group is completely open. You can join, ask questions, share any of the experience that's come up today. We'll always try and help and connect you with other people as much as possible. And yeah, as I say, our goal, as Michael said at the beginning, was when we first met, we were the only people in our organisation focusing on these sorts of things. And we just feel really passionately, don't we, that we don't want anyone to be suffering or just facing some of these challenges alone. So do reach out to us, to the group, and continue the conversations. Okay, so the last couple of minutes, Michael, is there any burning questions, what people are going to try first?
A lot of people saying thank you. Something's about like any specific tools out there that might be useful to use. A whole range of things there. So I think there's a lot of topics here that I think we could maybe come back to throughout the year. And if you're an expert and you want to share your experience, we happily support you do one of these sessions. All the speakers say we really help with hand holding through these sessions, try and make it as interactive and supportive as possible. No one wants to, this is probably the most sit and listen one we've done, isn't it? Because we try and make it, but there was just so much to cover. Plus, I didn't want the kids come running in as well, did we? Yeah, kids, animals, window cleaners, postmen, everyone is welcome. But do join the group. There's, as I say, 18 other webinars before this one. You can go and listen back to any of those and yeah, put your ideas forward of future ones. Do you want to mention the one in the March one? Oh gosh, sorry, yeah. Have I not got the, I didn't do a slide on it. Very sorry. Yes, next one. We've got one on Thursday, which is with CMX, and that's about building resilience for you, your community and your toolkit. That's a bit of a workshop. So we're going to be doing breakouts and discussions and sort of sharing our experience. It's always really cathartic, that session. So do come along if you're feeling like you need some strength. And then the next Knowledge and Community Network is going to be on the 18th of March. And we've got the lovely Judy Payne and Dr. Divyata Sohal from Henley Business School. And they're going to be talking about taking knowledge seriously. They've been doing a project and a study with Henley Business School, and they're going to share the outcomes and insights from that with this audience. So we always will send a link to everyone that joined with the slides and